the planet. The magnitude of the man-made changes has now overtaken and far surpassed the natural cycles. And many of the natural cycles actually are pointing in the opposite direction. The man-made global warming is now so pronounced that it is not only overwhelming in magnitude, but it is reversing what would otherwise be the effect from the natural cycles.
And that goes along with what David in Arizona asked you. He wants to know, please tell us what percentage of carbon dioxide is caused by human activity relative to other sources of carbon dioxide.
Well, the majority of it is caused by human activity, and a cutting-edge study now quantifies the different causes of global warming. About 43%, or almost half, is from CO2. 27%, a little more than a quarter, is from methane. Then there is black carbon, also referred to as soot, which in some areas of the world is a very, very pronounced cause. And then you have the nitrous oxides and carbon monoxide and so forth. But the largest single source is man-made CO2.
Right. And Jim in Cleveland asks this question. He says, quote, in a worst-case scenario, what's the soonest that the planet could reach critical mass if global warming persists at the current rates? You know, people have talked about a level of, I think it's 350 parts per million as sort of the threshold here. But he's wondering how much more carbon dioxide, how many more greenhouse gases can be pumped into the atmosphere before it reaches critical mass, that no turning back point, I guess.
Well, in the view of many scientists, we have already reached critical mass if you define that phrase as reaching the point where there are going to be dramatic changes on the planet. I mentioned earlier, the North Polar ice cap is completely disappearing right now. We're at 389 parts per million, almost 390. And some scientists, as you said, Kieran, say that 350 is probably the safe level we should shoot for. They have already reached a kind of a compromise with the science and saying the best the political systems can imagine doing is stabilizing at 450, which is way higher than many scientists think is a safe level. But the danger is that we'll barrel through 450 and go way on up there, just making this an entirely different kind of planet from the one that had conditions that were conducive to the rise of human civilization.
Which leads me to my question about what you hope comes out of this Copenhagen conference. I mean, even in best case scenario, you have the EU promising more than President Obama may promise, and he could still face a lot of pushback at home, dealing with the wars and dealing with healthcare as well. I mean, how much is a political reality?
Well, I think this meeting, sometime toward the end of next week, we will probably see a political agreement among the heads of state gathered there, including President Obama, that will give instructions to the negotiators to fill in the details and get a binding treaty early next year. But in this political agreement they're shooting for, they will hope to also get specific commitments, country by country, to start the reductions process sooner than would start if we just waited for the treaty next year.
Former Vice President Gore, it's great to catch up with you again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming in.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much for answering the questions from our viewers as well. There's a lot of interest in this. Thanks a lot. Well, still ahead, it's 30 minutes past the hour. We have a look at the top stories right now. Winter is still 2 weeks away, but snow plows are out from the plains to the northeast. A monster storm paralyzing travel in more than a dozen states. Extremely dangerous blizzard-like conditions and blizzard conditions themselves forecast for parts of the Midwest. A mix of rain, sleet, and heavy snow from New York all the way up to New England.
Thanksgiving with no turkey for